This is hopefully a short video about structures in Arc Ascended modding. It will cover things like building new structures, including engrams, common roadblocks, making sure it can craft items from other inventories, power, fuel, and some very basic things involved with structures. Okay, so first things first, we're going to be making a copy of the smithy. You can make a child if you want, but the restrictions on that mean that you can't access any functionality in the graphs within the inventory component. This isn't an issue, feel free to make a child. We're going to be copying over the inventory component, the engram for the smithy, the item for the smithy, and the container or the structure for the smithy. We're just going to give them all something realistic for a name. Doesn't really matter, but be consistent. Now, first things first, open your mod data asset blueprint. This is where you'll be adding your engrams and your structure to make sure they will place appropriately when in Arc. This one here is where you will add your engram. This one here is where you add your structure. This is the building in the world, not the item in your inventory. Make sure you save the file. Now, currently in Arc, there is a bug where when you, in the editor only, when you play after editing the mod data asset file, none of your changes will take effect. The solution is fairly simple, but it's just annoying. Go to your world settings. If you don't have it, you can get it from the Windows. And look for Primal Game Data Override. It will have your mod Primal Game Data BP in there. Clear it. Start Pi. And then stop Pi. And put your Primal Game Data asset back in there. This updates whatever weird cache issue is going on, and all of these changes will take effect. Open your engram. Set whatever levels and engram points you want. I will just use something very simple so we know that this works. You can change any of these settings that make any sense to you. I'm not going to go into the specifics on them. Make sure you add your item into the blueprint entry here. Compile and save. Open your item. Again, there are tons of settings and options. I will not be covering them. This structure to build field is the structure, the world item, that will be built when you use this. Make sure you add yours in there. Save and compile. Open your structure. And look for consume. Consumes primal item. This is the item, the object in your inventory that will be consumed when you place a structure. These need to be linked appropriately. Save and compile. Now this should all be set up. When you enter the game, your engram should be listed. You should be able to learn it, and it should appear as a craftable item. If you want to add it to another structure's inventory for crafting, that's something a little bit different. but for now, it will be in your inventory. As you can see from here, give blueprint to player inventory. And there's our smithy. Now, as you can see, it's learnable. When we go to crafting, our smithy is there. I'll just give myself one so I don't have to spawn in the resources. When we go to place it, it needs to be placed on the floor still. Again, that is an option that can be turned on or off in structure settings. And there's our smithy. Now, even though this did work, as you can see, we have the resources and we can craft them. The problem is that we're using our old inventory component, which means that we can't do any graphing within it. See, this is the vanilla one. We want to put our own in here. Since this is a copy and not a child, we can delete the old inventory component and add in our own. To prove that this worked, you can open up your inventory component, search for name, and this is what you will see on the inventory screen on the inside of the structure when looking at it. Again, just to prove that things worked, we can rename our structures as well. And our item. And the inventory component will not be updated on previously placed structures. It still says smithy. You can just pick it up and put it back down in order to get a brand new one with an updated inventory component. As you can tell, new inventory component. The problem with doing this though, is that we still can't craft our items. Solution is pretty simple though. We open our inventory component, go to the defaults, and look for force allow crafting. This one here. You stick in the inventory component of the item that you want to force allow. So those items said they can only be crafted in smithies. Your structure is no longer a smithy since it's a copy, but you can put in here anvil bench, and you can put in the inventory component for the original anvil bench. Save and compile this. Now they're craftable. Lots of mods will add their own items to vanilla structures. So like an improved bow or something like that might be craftable in the vanilla smithy. Since your structure is no longer a smithy though, they will not appear there. We can fix this quite easily. In our inventory component, go to the function overrides and look for Impersonate. Add the structure class of the structure you wish to pretend yours is. So anvil bench, that would be the smithy. Any additions from mods to the smithy will also appear in your structure now. We can test this pretty simply. We can open our mod data asset file. We will add in a dummy item. Remember, this is just for testing, just to demonstrate for you how it works. We also run into that mod data asset caching issue again. There's our dummy item, crafted at a smithy. And there it is in our inventory. Even though it's not technically a smithy, it will still show up. Even in our previously placed structure, it's still there and craftable. Let's say we wanted to make our structure bigger than normal. It's pretty simple. We can just go into our structure, into the defaults, and just change the scale. To show you what happens, though, there are some consequences of which you should probably fix. When you go to place it, you'll notice it can still clip into walls without causing issues, which is probably not what you want. If you open up the console and type in debug structures, you will see these little boxes on your structure. You can tell that they don't overlap the entire thing right now. And when you bring it close to the wall, it only shows invalid when the boxes clip the walls. You have to adjust these so that they're approximately the size of your structure. Otherwise, it won't act properly. You open up your structure. I'll just drag it to the side so you can see both, hopefully. And you look for placement. These here. You can tell when I changed this one, for example. The boxes got smaller. You just adjust them until they're approximately the size and shape of your container. Doesn't have to be exact. It went too far and it's clipping the ground. But you can change things like offsets so it moves all of the boxes up. We'll call this good enough. Now you can see it behaves much more appropriately. If you want your structure to require power, open the inventory component and search for wireless. Add a new entry, search for power. Wireless power consumer. The tech one's just below it too, if you want tech power instead. Go to your structure and look for power. You can turn off battery power if you don't want that to be an option. I'm going to turn off auto activate if powered. Active requires power. You want that one. Otherwise it will turn on all by itself. If you look for string, you will find activate and deactivate container string. It's just the turn on off text prompt. Can toggle activation allows it to be turned on and off manually. As you can see, it's unpowered. And now it's powered. But it's still off. And now it's on. This is going to be a simple example on how to change the inventory slot count if you want to do it via an option like a multi-use or an ini config or an in-game UI or something like that. We're going to go into our structure. We'll have this if your structure is a copy and not a child. Do not play with it. Just leave it alone. Let it do its thing. This will also involve some amount of replication. I'm not going to explain this. It's too much to go into in one video or even a bunch of videos. So we don't want the preview structure. We want the actual placed one. We want the server. We get the game mode. And off of that, get int option ini. These are options, configs written into your game user settings ini file. This section is the header name. Use something reasonable related to your mod. And this is the config option that we will try to read and the value that it will spit out. It needs to be replicated in order for the server to get proper data to the client in order to display it correctly. Just for an example, because I don't have this set up already, I'll disconnect this and just put in some random number. As you can see, updated correctly. If you want to add collision components to your structure, this is like a radius effect, like a trough, an area that is affected around the structure for whatever purposes you wish. I generally do it with a couple of components on the structure BP. So you look for collision in the component section and add a sphere collision. And then inside that one, you add a static mesh one. For the mesh, you can just use whatever mesh you wish. I found that this one here works very well. It's small and tiny and gets the job done. You can leave the material if you want, or you can put in your own custom one to make it look fancier. There's a few like the trough one right here, or the power one from the generators. They work pretty well. I'll change the sphere to be a little bit bigger so you can see it. And then the mesh. And this is what it should look like. In order to get the overlap events to work, you want to add a component to begin overlap on the sphere, not on the mesh. For now, we're just going to print it. In the sphere, look for collision. You can change these to whatever you want. I usually do custom because it allows you to turn more things on and off. In this case, we're going to just do players, so we can leave it as only overlap with pawns. And we'll change this to overlap for player pawns, dino pawns, and pawn mesh. Some of these other ones are also required for things like riding on dinos and such, but for now I'll just leave them off. Look for prevent damage and check it. For whatever reason, if you don't do this, sometimes you end up punching the air around your structure in the collision box, and it actually affects your structure, which we do not want. The grid that you see is the collision box, and the rest of it is the mesh. And as you can see in the top left, the print is firing as I run across it. I'm going to add a multi-use entry. This is the radial wheel. We're going to use it to adjust the size of our mesh, the overlap sphere. Get multi-use. I'm going to add an entry. I'm just going to add one just so you can see how it works. You can add an increment and a decrement if you want, or something else. Make sure this number is unique to the structure. The priority is the order in the wheel that it appears. The negative ones will be last. You want to try multi-use. This is the index that we used. And in here, we're going to change the size of our collision mesh and our static mesh. We'll just make a function to stick them in real quick. We also need a float variable in order to adjust the sizes so we can keep track of it. And it needs to be a rep notify so that the clients can get the updated sizes. In our try multi-use, we'll change the size to the current size plus just a few hundred, just for an example. We'll start the default off relatively small. In our rep notify function, you can double click here or here. We'll just call our other function we made. And then in here, we will change the size of the sphere by setting the radius to our new collision size. And the mesh, change the world scale. Again, to our new collision size. On begin play, we don't want the preview structure. Everything else can just call this function. And this way, when it starts, it will update the scales correctly. And when players change it, it will update the scales. It should work. And if we run outside and back in, our overlaps still fire. The only problem we currently have is that none of that data is saving in between sessions. Shrunk right back down again. Very simple fix. Back in our structure to the float variable and check save game. And it still works.